Welcome to You, Me, Empathy. Thank you for listening. We would like to remind you that this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Known as just a silly boy with a feely heart. Please consider supporting the show. Check us out on Patreon or simply leave a review on iTunes. Here's your host and creator of the show, Known Wells.
Hello, Feely humans. Welcome to another episode of You, Me, Empathy. My name is Known Wells, and this is episode 105 with my guest, Minter Dial, about putting heart into business. Minter is a successful business human and has been doing it for over a decade. Decades, I think. And we talk a lot about business and how business can be a force for good. And we talk about empathy in business and empathy in artificial intelligence and Minter's book, Heartificial Empathy. We talk about privilege and all sorts of other things. Minter is a lovely human, and I was just really grateful to get to talk with him. And I think you'll love him too. But before we get to the episode, though, I do want to share something very exciting, and that is 1 week from today. Today's December 2nd. 1 week from today is December 9th. 1 week from today, on December 9th, I will be sharing on social media. Make sure you're following You, Me, Empathy on Instagram and Twitter. I will be sharing for the first time a sneak peek into this new project I've been teasing. You lovely humans. I've been teasing for a while now, and on December 9th, I will be sharing it for the first time. And a bit more details about that. Specifically, I'll be sharing the opportunity for you to join the launch team for this new project. And what a launch team is essentially is humans like yourself who are excited about this thing and want to share it with their audience. And I'll get into more details about that on December 9th, but if you want to be a part of this thing, and I really hope you do, it means the world to me, and I think it will mean the world to you too. If you're, by the simple fact that you're listening to this podcast, which is near and dear to your heart, and it's something about, the show's about being empathetic. The show's about vulnerability and exploring our emotions, and this new project is all about that, and it's about you too. It's about us, and you'll see that, and that'll be a little clearer come December 9th. So look out for that. Make sure you're following You, Me, Empathy on Twitter and Instagram. I will be announcing it on December 9th, as well as December 9th, which is a Monday, I will be releasing an episode of the podcast, You, Me, Empathy, to get into that even further. So if you have any questions, make sure you listen to that episode, and look out for those announcements on December 9th. It's very exciting. I'm nervous and I'm excited, but the timeline of this, to get even more granular, is that December 9th will be sort of the announcement of the launch team, leading up into an early January crowdfunding campaign with a fully public launch with the site and everything and all the things in early February. So it's coming up. I'm very excited. I've been working very hard on it, and I hope you're as excited too, because really this new thing, and you'll see soon, this new thing is, it's about you. It's about all of us. It's about a community. So I'm very excited, and I can't wait to share it with you. Again, December 9th, look out for that announcement. Listen to that episode on December 9th. Very excited. Okay, what else? I guess that's it. Thank you for being here. Enjoy this episode 105, with my guest, Minter Dial.
Empathy empathy. La la la, la 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 la. You, me, empathy. Yeah. La la la.
Welcome to You, Me, Empathy, a podcast about exploring the struggles we face in our day-to-day lives as humans trying to get by on this wondrous and overwhelming pale blue dot. The intent of You, Me, Empathy is to talk openly, without judgment, about our mental health, our neuroses, our shared anxieties and worries, to create a dialogue that is vulnerable and deeply human and empathetic, and to share that dialogue with others to inspire emotional and cognitive collaboration and insight, so we can, hand in hand, break down the stigma that make us feel shame and guilt for struggling, for feeling our feelings, for being feely humans. You, Me, Empathy is a safe, friendly space designed to inspire the beauty in each of us. Today, I'm grateful for an empathy-grounded journey with professional speaker, digital strategist, and author of the book Artificial Empathy, Minter Dial. Hello, Minter.
Hey there, Known. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for being here. We are connecting California to London. It's very exciting.
That's it. On this blue dot.
Yes, on this blue dot, we're connected. That is the point. That's my aim in life, Minter, is to. I mean, I think that's one of the purposes of like the human spirit is to connect with people.
100%.
Yeah.
In my bio, I finally come out of my shell. I usually write, like I'm a professional speaker and consultant and author, of which there are just gazillions. What I've now got as a new sort of bio tagline is I'm an itinerant bohemian, looking for interesting journeys and connecting interesting people.
I love that. That's what it's all about, right? Because I do feel very deeply in the power of human connection and how that connection can lead us to so much perspective and insight and growth and just greater capacities for joy. One of the things that strikes me is the power of conversation. And I've always been interested in the concepts of conversation in community. Yet the thing that sometimes we struggle with in the conversation element is the listening part and the silence part. Yeah. Listening is and you've talked about this. I've listened to some of your podcast, and you've talked about this idea that listening, and I've talked about it as well in this podcast. Listening is a huge part of just empathy. I think I forgot who the guest was, but I enjoyed it. He was talking about, this was a guest on your episode, one of your podcast episodes. He was saying how when we listen, most of the time people are trying to think about the next thing they want to say. So they're not really actively engaged in the listener or the
Totally.
someone speaking.
Yeah, they want to interrupt with their next thought, or at least they're already thinking about next thought, which means they don't have a clean slate for the listening that's happening.
Exactly. Well, Minter, I'd love to sort of explore I'm fascinated by the journey that you've taken, you being this itinerant bohemian. And I'd love to hear about your sort of own relationship with mental health to start. Like, is that something you think about? Have you struggled with mental health? Have you been engaged within it in your life? Like, where are you at with that?
So I have been extremely privileged all my life. So I'm a white man who had the opportunity to go to a number of four-letter word schools, and that gave me a step up in life. I also was generally predisposed to be optimistic, so I systematically want to be the energy, want to be the one who uplifts and sees the glass 3/4 full. Yet, over the last few years, it's become apparent that just doesn't work all the time. And so in my life, I've come across hardship, and it's not because you're privileged and distinctly well off, or at least doing well enough that you don't have real hardships. And the first sort of bazooka moment for me was 9/11. I say bazooka moment because I was in New York. I was overlooking the Twin Towers, and a lot of things were happening. Specifically, I was running a company called Redken, which is a part of L'Oreal, sells shampoos and hair colors to hairdressers. And it's signed underneath Fifth Avenue, New York City. So everything we did was related to the spirit of New York. And I felt personally under siege as the boss of that company. Outside of that, I also had 4 friends who were killed and many others who I knew about. And I saw the second airplane fly down, and there was a sort of a come to Jesus moment, and just glossing over it wasn't going to happen. So I ended up coming through that with a lot of pain, and also this ties into the fact that I had been researching the life of my grandfather. And so my grandfather, after whom I was named, he had been killed as a prisoner of war of the Japanese in the Second World War. And where that day really spiraled in so many ways. But that day, there were almost as many casualties on September 11 as there were at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. And my grandfather was captain of a ship in the Philippines, and I found the logbook in which he wrote 0340 hours. It was on the 8th of December, 1941. 0340 hours. Hostilities with the Japanese Empire have been declared. War has started. And I thought of myself that day that was sort of my sort of continuing situation. Anyway, through that, I ended up meeting 130 veterans of the Second World War, and made the story, the film, which is on PBS, and the book about the life of my grandfather. And I realized that you can have horrific experiences that make you sad, but not necessarily depressed.
Sure.
As in, this is normal to be sad. And as opposed to, Minter, you're looking depressed. No, I'm actually just sad.
Yeah.
And that really exposed me to this notion that hardship, it's normal to feel sad. It doesn't necessarily mean that I've got a chemical imbalance. It's just not, this is shit. And
right.
I'm in a bad place.
Yeah. 2 very important. And first of all, just, wow, what a story that is. And to be there during 9/11. I mean, I was a freshman in college at that point, and I'll never forget that day. I can't imagine being in New York at that time. What a horror. That is.
There's the smell, there's the look on the faces, and then there's the calls with the wives of your friends.
A couple of things that stick out to me, Minter, is one, and you said a very important thing, is that hardship happens to everyone. I think it is important to recognize our privilege. I am a white male. I have privilege. I think that is an important element to empathy, an important element to relationships and connecting. But another aspect of that, of course, is that, to your point, everyone has hardships. Everyone does. And I think it's a disservice to connection if we, because we do have this tendency as humans to think of people in sort of high status situations or high achievement as being invulnerable, as being superheroes. And I think that's I think that's unfair.
In society, media tends to put on a pedestal beautiful people, and beautiful rich people on top of that. How can they really? Oh, they're having hardships. Yeah, right. Look at them.
Exactly. It's all the more important, I feel, for people in sort of higher status positions to be vulnerable about their struggles. to say, look, like I may be making $10 million a year or whatever. I may be in this blockbuster movie, but I also struggle with depression or whatever it may be. I think it allows us to kind of, it's a little gateway into their own heart. It's a little connecting point.
So to go further with that, I'm writing a new book. I'm trying to get through it, hopefully for summer of next year. And the subtitle is paraphrased, "The Glory of Imperfection," and how not only accepting it but embracing it, putting it forward, is, I think, the newest territory in corporations. And my whole background is basically a business guy working in large business, and I think of business as a tremendous potential force for good. Yet we have so much pretension and arrogance and presentation of the communications that you want, that brands, companies tend to put forward, like the narrative that you're trying to rush through is always going to be better. Mm-hmm. You're in comms, I'm in comms, we're all in comms actually, but this notion of retouching the girl so she has no wrinkles is inevitably putting down anyone that does have wrinkles. And so we finally got to a point where in the States in particular, led by people like the guys and women at CVS, who are promoting in beauty a more natural, unretouched image, or allowing that to come out, and to find that balance, because you want to present something that's obviously desirable, mm-hmm. but it's got to be real. And so I think that the ability for us to embrace that in an organization, which means embracing people's foibles, maybe bad sense of humor. Mm-hmm. I need to go and pick up my daughter at 2 p.m, whatever the hiccups are, including, of course, depression, and or coming into in a bad mood, or somehow this is us. Accept me with my warts, and I think over time we'll become more authentic, more fulfilled, and in that place find a deeper, better energy than the one we're always presenting a facade.
Yeah, I'm in absolute agreement of that. I think because the striving for perfection is not there's no end game there. There's no going forward there, because that thing doesn't exist.
It's not a destination.
It's not a destination. So like accepting people for who they are and meeting them where they are. And by that, I mean really seeing them and listening to them and really getting to the heart of what that person is about. Like that, when we do that, we're actually seeing the beauty in their flaws. We're seeing like the hidden talents within their foibles that we may have missed because we're striving for this thing that doesn't exist.
One of my observations, so we're two white males talking to one another, but the observations that I've had. So I studied at university. I studied trilingual literature, and my minor was women's studies.
Okay.
And I would like to say that it ought to become obligatory, that at least in the freshman curriculum, everybody has to take sort of Women's Studies 101.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was really eye-opening. I took 12 courses that covered all sorts of things like politics of touch, women in history, and a few other things. But my observation is that time after time, I see more women flaunt their imperfections. I don't say flaunt. I mean, at least present them and say, "Oh, I really screwed up. I was bad at this." And I'm just, it's just remarkable how few times I see men speaking in that same kind of vulnerable tone.
I guess I have the same observation. I think, there's a certain stigma around men, being in touch with their vulnerability and emotions. Is that something that you have struggled with at all?
Well, let's say that I have been the kind of guy that glossed over
Mm-hmm.
the imperfections.
Sure.
And in the spirit of like I played rugby for 18 years.
Oh, wow.
And so in that space, I got a gash in my knee. Well, stiff upper lip, move through.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And so I kind of have brought that into my life, which means, well, shit happens, move along. And so I've been in that mode, generally speaking, yet. And this is sort of gets to the core of why I ended up writing this last book, one that was published just the end of last year, Artificial Empathy, where I kind of took a look at myself as to how much empathy I had. I'd been writing about it for a long time. I've been talking about it, and I operated as best I could with empathy in my role as an senior executive at L'Oreal. Yet I was surrounded by a lot of people who didn't really, let's say, highly consider it. And I then wanted to sort of reflect on my own capability of empathy and examine more honestly my level of energy. Because I was thinking, well, I'm feeling this energetic. And so to begin with is, well, yes, normal. You're 54, you're getting old. And yet there are some other things that were happening in my personal life, or life is personal, but let's say in the more intimate space of my personal life, that was making me aware that the energy level wasn't just because I was getting old. And so the specific things that happen. So let's say from, if I want to go up on stage and I got to speak to, a bunch of executives who need a motivational speech, I'm not going to necessarily go into this part of it, but I'll tell them, empathy is really useful for actually making great business, and it's better for your bottom line. It's better for your motivation of your employees. And there's a lot of great things within that. Yet the reality was the reason why I got into it in the first place was, as to writing it, was because my best friend killed himself. And I spent the last 6 weeks of his life really in constant contact with him as he told me about it. And it was deeply painful. And I recognized that I wasn't able to connect into his pain. I wasn't really, I struggled to sort of be fully within it because first of all, I didn't succeed in stopping him. And then within it, I started, conjuring up, well, what does it mean for me? And that's sort of that's where the germ of writing this book came from.
I see. I'm very sorry to hear about your friend. That's very difficult.
Yep. It's the second time it's happened to me. Wow. And that I accompanied somebody right through. And well, though I try to be positive about certain things, which comes back to, life is short, and take advantage of this one round that we have. So I'm sort of tend to be more focused on that side of it as opposed to woe is me or feeling responsible for his killing himself, because I certainly wasn't responsible, and two, I don't necessarily feel responsible, but I did recognize that I could have been more empathic. That's the point.
In what ways do you feel now, having written this book, looking back at those 6 weeks, again, this is not me saying no one should feel responsible for that. That's their choice, and it's a very tragic one. And but I understand and empathize with maybe guilt people have, and asking themselves, what more could I do? Do you have a sense of like, what does that mean? What does being more empathic in that situation mean to you?
Well, so first of all, my general instinct was provide a solution.
Sure. That's a common male go-to.
Exactly. Wow, haven't you thought about this? What about if we did this together? Or, other things will come around. So I was trying to find ways to open up some glimmer somewhere, and really just I was running around in this little box with my own little thoughts, and I just couldn't. There's no way I couldn't find a way in. Philippe was a man who was sparse in his words, and so he didn't necessarily open up a lot in general. And anyway, so it just got me the idea that listening I could do better.
Yeah, listening is essential.
Yeah, and it is an activity. If you just listen,
it is
without judging. You listen intensely, and one of the things that I've been exploring recently is a thing called an empathy circle, run by a guy called Edwin Rutsch. And in these empathy circles, the exercise is to listen and rephrase back what the other person is saying to the point where the other person feels listened to. And that exercise for me is really eye-opening, because like sometimes my mind goes whirring along and I've got my own things and I'm thinking a million things. I want to react to what's being said, and which could be saying judgment, but at least sometimes it's like I want to jump in and say this back to you is really cool. And plus I got other notifications coming up that are maybe whacking my mind elsewhere.
Sure.
It's made me aware of my sometimes total inability to listen properly.
Mm-hmm. How is that listening muscle you've been tapping into? How has that worked for you in the business space as someone, or let me back up, when you were, executive at L'Oreal, how did you fare in the listening department? How did you fare in the empathy department?
Well, so I was generally and genuinely aware of this notion of empathy. And I credit a lot to the years I did it on studying women's studies and being in a room where generally there were, let's say I was, there were 12 of us and I was the guy, and if there were 11 women, they were very diverse. And so the funny thing about women's studies is it's actually diversity studies. Within women, or let's say women's studies, they inevitably embrace all diversity, which is so ironic at some level. But it got me into this sort of mode of learning how to listen, not take things personally necessarily. And so when I was at work, I would spend time, I would try to make half of my day unbooked with meetings, which had the purpose of helping me to think and to write strategic notes and that kind of stuff. But it was also about allowing for the unexpected and somewhat open door policy. I generally had assistants who guarded my door, but I also wanted to be able to be available. So available in mind and time for people to tell me things. And if I could do that with, a genuine interest, then I would first of all figure out what's going on in the office, politics and all that, figure out what's going on in someone's mind. And maybe where I was pretty often what I would fall back to is, well, hey, that's a great idea. Why don't you go do this solution? But I was pretty good at listening, getting into it, but maybe could have allowed them to find their own solution more often. I could probably do the same thing with my children.
What you're saying is very important, and I think it's something we all struggle with. I know that I've been in situations with my wife where I've, I brought the solution. Hey, let's try this, and it's coming from a place of care and love. You want to see them in less pain or whatever it may be. But the reality is that, more often than not, people just need to be heard and seen, and the space to just frolic around in their own noggin to figure out the next step for themselves. and we can be mirrors back to them, you know?
Yeah. Edwin sent me some remarkable interviews in the 1960s by Carl Rogers, who, as a therapist, never intended to, what he wanted to do was always be just a reflection. And same with Gene Shenlip, I can't remember how to pronounce his last name, but they you know, their notion was, well, this is what I hear you saying, and their intention was to really make sure that they, in their reformulation, they make the other person understand that I understood what you were saying.
Yes.
And if I get it wrong, that's cool. That's okay. It means I got it wrong. Then they can correct me. And in that moment of correction, the person who's speaking gets to work again, get back into texture, reformulate, because maybe in their first expression they weren't quite as clear also. And more importantly, you start, you know, getting down to a second gear, third gear, into that deeper thought. You keep listening, reflecting back. And anyway, the Carl Rogers interviews, which, you know, black and white, very wonderfully homey in their way, but are a wonderful example of the power of reflective listening.
Yeah, you know, Carl Rogers was mentioned in a couple episodes ago of this podcast. I was talking with my friend Tony, who's a psychotherapist, and he's very much of the Carl Rogers model, which is the term was people-centered therapy, which I very much appreciate and value. Yeah.
It's ironic because in the end of the day, the people-centric in business, because that's my typical filter, known as this notion of, you know, what's going on in business, and we're now talking so much about customer-centric.
Sure.
I think the more important word actually beyond customer-centric is employee-centric. And within employee-centric is necessarily people-centric. Right.
Tell me more about that, because, you know, on one hand, my interpretation of that maybe could be you have to focus on the people that you not can control, but the people that are within your purview, and treat them right and treat them well and treat them with respect. And in doing so, that environment perhaps contributes to a greater connection with the customers, for instance.
Yeah.
Is that a fair extrapolation?
It's perfect extrapolation. I tend to say that you need to model the behavior you want within in order to get it without. As in the way you communicate towards the outside, towards the customers or stakeholders or whomever else. And the reason why sort of my book moved into AI, artificial empathy or artificial intelligence with empathy, was that I see a lot of people saying, well, let's just delegate the empathy to the AI, because ironically, AI doesn't have lots of notifications and worries about what I'm going to eat for lunch or whatever. It tends to zero in on the person that's communicating with it and has a very, black and white vision of that communication. It's abstracted from anything else polluting it. It is focused in on that. Let's say that its major complication is the data set with which it reads what's coming in. So why would you want to delegate your empathy? Well, perhaps it's because you're not empathic internally. Perhaps it's because you're not good enough at empathy. And by the way, if you're not good enough at empathy, then the way you code your machine to do that empathy will be fraught with problems.
I see. Now, this concept around artificial empathy or empathy in artificial intelligence, what is the practical sort of end goal of that? Like, what are we trying to achieve with that? Well,
so to the extent that there's a sort of business element to it, bottom line numbers.
ROI.
Yeah, that's the one. Yet, in the end of the day, business is about relationships, and so it's about cultivating better relationships. And so what is the role of empathy within relationships is really what that amounts to. And to the extent that you have an interface, or at least a number of people you need to deal with, you might need machines to help you deal with millions of people, because you as an individual aren't capable of interfacing with so many people. So the machines are not all bad. They can serve some benefit. They can create funnels. They can do triage, and help you to serve a better number, a larger number of clients better. So within that, empathy can participate. The question is whether you want to rush towards that ROI that you're talking about, whereas you can cut corners, you can have the maximum number of people dealt with the machine, or you're willing to cultivate a longer relationship. And so empathy as a person to person, and then as a person with machine to person, or as a machine to person, you need to find a congruent manner that allows you to deal with your customers in the most fulfilling way from the customer's perspective.
And that's so fascinating. So one aspect of that is this idea that potentially, digital systems or artificial systems can potentially open up greater opportunities to meet the needs of more customers, or meet their needs in a maybe better way, because you're potentially creating greater efficiencies, which leads to more time to ponder on the customer. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, you already have an enormous number of interactions happening with AI today, whether or not you're aware of it. For those of you who have Alexas and Siris, that's there you're having AI, and they are actively looking to find ways to make that AI more seeming empathic. And I think that the interesting point at some level, and discussions I've had with Edwin, who runs the culture of empathy, is this idea of what is empathy? And because there's so many different versions of it, right?
Right.
For you who really are in deep into it, I tend to look at it with my business slant as an observation. So it's not about the actions that follow. It's strictly in the observation, and the observation or perception, which includes listening, looking at the eye movement, facial expressions, and everything else that goes into communication, is what you're trying to do. And sometimes you don't need to demonstrate empathy. You can just be empathic. And the non-action can also be part of the empathy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think I think that's they're equal. I think they're equally important. And there are cognitive sort of aspects of empathy. Yeah. There's sort of more the feeling part of it. And there are dangers to empathy, as Paul Bloom has written about. Like
against empathy.
Against empathy, exactly. And if anyone hasn't read that, you should absolutely read it. It's very good. But yeah, it's what we're saying is, either way, like, it's an important thing to consider and think about, because I find that for my experiences, Minter, is that if I can reduce my ego leading my decisions, the better off I am and the people I interact with are.
Including your customers.
Including your customers, absolutely.
Yeah, so the people around you, your team, and the ego is so polluting. Yet, we do need to make decisions, and so where I tend to, let's say, write I talk about the tyranny of empathy. Sometimes you can be overdone. If all you do is listen, we don't necessarily, unfortunately, all have the time just to listen.
Right.
And sometimes you got to make a decision, and inevitably this will, and if it's done well, of course, you're going to piss people off because you can't please all the people all the time. And otherwise, you will run out of finite resources. And so sometimes where the ego, I feel, has its moment is that that decision-making time. Bingo, you've got to go with it. Like you're a quarterback, you're throwing the ball, and you got to choose somebody. The other wide receiver might have been wide open, but you chose somebody. You've got to make that decision, otherwise you'll end up being sacked.
Right. Right. Sports analogies.
There you go. I was doing that for you. I don't know if
where we are in
football.
I was a footballer, but your football. Not American
the right
football.
The proper football.
The proper football.
Like to say. Exactly. With the round ball. I support Liverpool, so
okay. Yes.
I'm a bona fide Liverpool football fan.
Have you heard about, speaking on the AI sort of empathy front, at MIT Labs, they're doing this project called Deep Empathy. And they ask, can we use AI to increase empathy for victims of faraway disasters by making our own homes appear smaller to homes of victims? So it's a little exercise where people can imagine what your neighborhood would look like in after a similar natural disaster. It's fascinating. So there's side-by-side pictures of, for instance, a suburb in Boston or a street in Boston that looks very similar to Baghdad or something, a street that's been bombed or something, or was hit by tsunami or something like that. And the idea is to allow the person to see these two pictures lined up and potentially increase empathy for those victims.
Well, I haven't actually heard about that specifically, but I've been involved with a lot of virtual reality simulations whose goal is to expand empathy. Where if you get into the world, or sometimes it's mixed or augmented reality and virtual reality, where the objective is to put you into the shoes of somebody else. Mm-hmm. And whereas in this case, I guess they're making my street in Beacon Street in Boston, feel like Aleppo. That's one type of virtual reality. The other one is to actually just be there, be in Aleppo, and instead of reading it in the print where it's an intellectual exercise, you have this visceral moment of including possibly the smells, where you are plunged into what it's like to live in a place where bombs go off all the time. And then there's the VR. There's another exercise I don't remember who was responsible. MIT very potentially did it as well, where you with the virtual reality, you look down and all of a sudden you have breasts as a man, and it's all of a sudden you're in the skin of a woman. And that what does that feel like? And so our ability to or turn a white man into a black man. These are ways for us to connect into this other experience.
Oh, that's so fascinating. So that's an even other step. It's like a step more forward. And I would argue, to go even further is to then actually experience those things in reality and in person. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
I've been listening to Becoming, as I mentioned before we got on, by Michelle Obama, and it's a marvelous narrative. Her ability to bring you into her world, which, like I was saying before, is the ability to read great novels, brings you into another person's life. In this case, it's narrated by her. And she's bringing you into the privacy of her home as a kid. And like I was mentioning before, she talks unashamedly of her foibles. And as a small anecdote, and referring back to somebody who didn't inhale, she says, I went out, kissed and smoked dope. It's funny that a first wife should be able to say that in 2019 compared to a few years ago.
And just a little interruption here a little footnote for the listeners. You may be young, but he was referring to Bill Clinton, of course.
Indeed.
Yes. No, I really need to read that book. I'm a big fan of Michelle Obama.
It's a beautiful story.
Minter, how can we? So the work that you do, the speaking that you do, the thinking, the researching, the writing, obviously. How do brands? I mean, we're talking about this, but what are the, like, when you go into companies and talk about empathy, and you talk about companies being more empathetic, like, how do brands become more empathetic? Like, what are the action steps? Like, is there such a thing?
There is, absolutely, fortunately, because in the end of the day, if you don't have action steps, businesses don't know how to operate. And the challenge, of course, with this type of, let's say, soft material is it's gooey, it's messy, and it's complicated to implement.
Right.
So the first thing I like to do is have the C-suite at the top of the company render themselves aware of where they are. And so that self-awareness is actually, how empathetic do you think you are? And have that discussion with them. It says, oh, well, really, we're very empathic. So how does that, okay, so how does that look? Or you might find some people say, well, no, that's not true. And look at that, get that sort of out in the open. Then once that has happened, the second part is to attach what you're trying to do in the business with regard to empathy, to what they're strategically trying to do. So if strategically we have said that we need to cut costs, oh, okay, how can empathy be part of that? And it turns out that empathy can have a role in everything. So let's say I have to go to a department and I have to cut some heads, as we talk with such wonderful, charming, poetic license. Well, so when you're firing somebody, it turns out you can also use empathy within firing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you employ empathy appropriately with genuine interest, well, you may find yourselves doing that better, creating less acidity, less damage to your ongoing reputation. So there's an example. I try to take a hard example because they're and a counterintuitive one, because actually empathy can help within that. So empathy isn't about being nice necessarily, but it can also, if well done, help you to give a softer landing and a more intelligent landing to the hard decision or unfortunate news that you need to deliver. So find out what you're trying to do strategically and then attach it to then the empathy into that strategic initiative helps it give it a little bit more grip, because that's going to help you achieve what you're trying to do and who you're trying to be. Then afterwards, once you get into that, then the modes of learning to be more empathic, because contrary to some other people, I don't believe that it's something you teach. I think it's something you need to favor or encourage and create an environment where empathy can be employed, because ultimately empathy needs to be done every day with discretionary energy. And that's something you don't dictate. Mm-hmm. So in order for the empathy then to be better, there's examples we were just talking about with VR, but you don't necessarily need to use virtual reality. You can practice, for example, speaking to people that don't come from your same neighborhood. What does that look like? Well, you can do it a little bit more in a factus manner, but you can also, you could just maybe speak to the bus driver. You get on, you punch your ticket, hey, and you without interrupting them, of course, make them not good at driving the bus, but find people who you don't normally interact with if bus drivers aren't part of your normal community, or the teller at the bank, the cashier at the grocery store, or an unemployed, a homeless person, or whoever it is. Mm-hmm. Try to get into their life and practice genuine listening to them. And it may feel awkward at the beginning because you're not familiar with their land, but once you've done it a few times, it becomes useful. So as a business person, and the other problem with business people, there's so many actually, outside of the stress and the lack of time, is that typically business people have this potential to be earning a lot of money. And if you earn a lot of money, there are studies that show that people who are, let's call them rich, tend to be less good at empathy. They don't have time to listen to other people. They're like, well, I got here because I'm good, and I don't need to listen to other people. And anyway, so in business, there are many barriers to being empathic. And so getting that awareness, linking it to strategy, and then using different techniques, such as going to speak to somebody you don't know. But it could also, hey, listen, encourage everybody to read. Every other book you should read should be a novel, a classic novel, and just do it for fun. And maybe make a budget for that if that's what's needed to encourage it further. Hey, $10 a week, buy a new book, buy a classic, and read it. Mm-hmm. Something like that.
I love that. I love all of that. I mentioned before we started recording, I work for we're all a remote team or a distributed team. And one of the things we do, we're a tiny team, there's 11 of us. But one of the things we do every week on Fridays, we have retrospective meetings where each of us goes around and talks about the highs and lows of the week on the work front and the personal front. And the intention of that is to allow each of us to connect with each other, but also gives us space to be vulnerable. So my question to you is like, how does vulnerability play a role in this empathetic practice within the business?
Well, difficulty. And let's say that if the empathy and that vulnerability isn't being modeled at the highest level, in other words, the CEO and they're in large organizations, then it's going to be impractical and unlikely to work down through the ranks. I mean, we're programmed. We go to business schools and schools in general just to show that we're the best. Come home, hey, look, I got an A. You don't come home with pride and say, I got a C, or generally not. And so that weakness element is something that needs to be culturally accepted. And so at a smaller level, if you're in a small team where the head of your company is the first to regularly submit to his or her vulnerabilities, then it becomes easier to flow through. Mm-hmm. As you get bigger and you have issues like, I'm going to be talking to my shareholders, and I get up at the front of the shareholders and I start crying, this is not going to end well. So, like Theresa May and her recent, announcement of resignation, that was more endearing, but she does not continue to lead. So the notion of vulnerability is, and to the point of my new book about this notion of imperfection, is absolutely fundamental. And so there's the ability to listen is actually a first element of humility, which says, no, what you have to say is important to me, and I'm going to demonstrate that by giving you the time to listen to you. Mm-hmm. Because humility is an important thing, because it suggests that I don't know everything. It suggests that you, with whatever you have to say, are on another pedestal that I'm interested in listening to. I don't want to say higher or lower, but this other idea that your time is important to me. And if that's part of a vulnerability, to show that I don't know everything, I don't make all the decisions, and what you have to say is an important contribution. Then after, as a second level, is, well, let me just tell you, I cried when I watched the towers fall down. And so to accept the notion of a white male, with classic education crying is an unlikely experience. You don't see that happening so often. The CEO of L'Oreal, parenthetically, called me up and said, hey, listen, you need to come to Paris right after this. And I said, well, it's really complicated. My wife is handicapped, and and I got my kids, and I got a few friends who are missing, and I got to run the company, and my team is in disarray. It's really important you come to Paris and you tell us how we're going to do the business next year. So the things happen. I flew on a private plane on the 15th of September out of Islip. And it was a morning flight, 8 a.m. And by the way, I didn't even have to show my passport at check-in or landing in Le Bourget in Paris. It was the first non-military plane to fly out of New York. So I get to Paris and I make the speech. And as it went through, I had rehearsed a 2-hour, 50-minute speech, which normally was done by my entire team. And I ended up having to do the whole thing by myself. And as it came to happen, I ended up having to just deliver an ad hoc speech. I didn't go into my personal life, but I did talk about the experience of being there and seeing things happen. And it just, but I couldn't go to the place of the deeper personal story because it was an environment where too much was on the perfection and it just wasn't there. Mm-hmm. Yet I think that's what was needed. So if I had to go swing back with me now 54 years old with some perspective, that's what I would have rather done.
Yeah. I wonder, I think one of the things I'm getting at and want to explore a little bit is there is you mentioned it before, the CEO, the C-suite executive who is they're at the top because they didn't listen. They're at the top because they've been quote unquote not weak, right? Yeah. And the potential sort of how they could be perceived if they were to, shed a tear or whatever. Like I want to get around this. Like I think vulnerability can come sort of crying, but also it's just about being true and real about emotion, right? Like I always think about, I just started reading this book called No Hard Feelings, and it's all about embracing emotions at work. It's really great, and they use the example of Howard Schultz when he came back as CEO when the company Starbucks was not doing well. This is early 2000s or whatever it was. And he came back and he gave, a huge speech in front of the whole company, and he cried during it out of real emotion, out of real sort of distraught by like where things are and how, sort of coming from a place of, this is my baby, this is my passion. We need to do this. I believe in this, and there's real power there. So I think I want to get to this idea of like, I want to see leaders like my own boss, leaders who can cry and can reveal like their emotion, and not have to feel like they have to be the strong, strapping human like Atlas taking on the whole weight of the world.
Totally. I agree. I mean, so crying isn't, let's say, one of the emotions. The other one is just the ability to say that I screwed up, that I wasn't perfect, the book that I want to get into this notion of actually this dark space.
Okay.
How much of the dark space that you have that you generally hold deeply private and intimate, you're able to reveal. And the issue with that starts with your own ability to do it with yourself.
Right.
We
That's
tend
where it
to
starts.
say, well, yeah, the problem is I can't say it to other people. The reason I can't say it to other people is I'm not prepared to accept it within me in the first place.
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly right.
Behind that veneer, we're able to hide. Well, I can't possibly say that to my staff because they're going to think of me as weak. Actually, I'm going to think of me as weak.
Yeah.
And what's that about? And so I mean that's the kind of thing that I've done in my life. I've sort of said I'm not going to do that, and I got a gash on my knee. Well, so whoop-de-doo. And so and a part of me thinks that some of that's okay, because if you accept every little nick and issue, then you're going to get bogged down in that. So there's this notion of needing to know what's big enough to be real weakness and a real issue, and what's just a nick and get over it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there are levels there, and I think you bring up a very important part, which is just the self-awareness piece of it. Like I think that's like the first bit of homework we have to do, because you're right. If we're not able to be vulnerable and have empathy within ourselves and to engage with our emotions and learn about them and be curious about them and figure out like what they mean to us and how they impact us, then we're certainly not going to be able to do that with other humans.
Somehow I'm thinking now that in that moment that you facilitate that greater awareness of yourself, you create a placid moment where you're better able to listen to other people. There's sort of a quietness that once you've got that monkey off your shoulder that keeps on talking in your ear, but you don't usually, you're trying to shove it away, get away. And then you sort of, it's like the benefit of meditation in general, which I think is so fundamental, this whole story. Actually, you're better able to plug into what is being said.
Oh, I agree. Because we're in a place of acceptance. We're in a place of seeing ourselves for who we are. And when we're in that space, it does allow us to see others for who they are. It allows us to accept others for what they are and who they are.
So you have to balance that with the pressures of performance. So everything is always not paradoxical, but at least in conflict. And there's always going to be pressures, and nothing is perfect. And so it's a messy world. And because you have to perform, you need to get that artwork in by noon.
Sure.
And someone walks in your office, hey, do you have a second noon? No.
Right.
I got to do 45 minutes work and I've got 29 minutes. No, not going to happen. Sorry. So that's a reality. And you wish you could be more empathic at that moment, and the other person is worried.
Well, you can be. You can say, hey, you know what? I hear you. I want to listen to you. I have this deadline that's happening. Do you mind, like, once I finish this, I would love to meet you and chat about this. Like,
yeah,
that's all it takes.
Yeah, absolutely. But what we do is we get brash. No. Hey, listen, I got to go.
It's stress.
I get stressed. I don't even have the time to explain. And you just get, overwhelmed with these two killers of empathy, which are stress and lack of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lack of time. That's such an interesting concept, because it's, we like to think about it in a linear fashion. I like to think about it less so. I mentioned the pale blue dot analogy a lot, or that sort of that image, given to us by the great Carl Sagan. But I like to think about the space we live in as humans and the world we live in, and sort of where we are in time as being kind of random and kind of weird and glorious and really lacking in control, or not giving humans that control. Like I think there's so much. I've found so much peace and grace and joy in my life by limiting or understanding that I don't have that much control in life.
It's a necessary thought. Where I go with it, the word that I use the most is chaos.
Oh, yeah.
Because in the chaos theory and the notion of chaos within gosh, it's not astrophysics. Sorry, within deep thought. Anyway, the idea that chaos is a part of us, and as much as we want balance and order, there's always going to be a ball that you throw at a wall that one day will go through the wall. And if we can accept that possibility, where anything can happen at all times, you sort of have to come to peace with the fact is that you can't control everything, and even the most obvious and most controlled item in the world, where you hit the ball against the wall and then all of a sudden the ball flies through the wall, there's nothing that is forever real.
And I love that analogy. I think I feel like that perspective is necessary for greater capacity for empathy, because in that space we are open to new ideas. We're open to whatever happening. I think there's so much in the world, frameworks with which to look at the world that are limiting in belief, or just limited in perspective. And I think the greater perspective we have, and the greater ability to see that, like, look, there are laws of the universe that we all follow, but we don't know how they work. And like, obviously that's the big level of what we're talking about. But I feel like the greater capacity for empathy is in the space of, hey, there's so many perspectives. There's no right or wrong. Like, I'm open to these ideas because I have an open heart.
Totally. Well, so I wanted to, if I could share with you a story of the power of serendipity, which I think is intimately related. So I did this film, which is on PBS for Memorial Day weekend, and it's done rather well. But I certainly didn't make out to want to do the film. So the film is deeply personal. It reveals a number of darker secrets of our family, and also helped me to construct better understanding of who I am. But the way that the film came around to be on PBS is just the most remarkable story by itself, which isn't part of the story, but I just was open to stuff happening. And if I give you furthermore 9/11 story, 3 months before September 11, 2001, a 23-year-old kid connected with me and said, "Hey, listen, I was told I should meet with you. It would be really interesting. I'm a film student at NYU." I said, "Oh, okay." So I meet with him. And, so I set the appointment, and the appointment was for 3:00 on that Tuesday afternoon. And so that morning we connected and said, we're going to maintain that meeting. And we did. And, because that's what I felt was right. And so I met this stranger and we talked. And of course, over several Guinness, it was in an Irish pub, we explored what happened that day. And I told him about this story that I've been researching for 10 years about my grandfather, who was killed as a prisoner of war, and the impact it's had on my family. And so that's an amazing story. Anyway, we parted, and then 13 years later, in March of 2014, I get a Skype message. And he writes, "Hey, Minter, it's Josh. Do you remember me?" Josh, no, I don't recall. Yeah, well, we met like 13 years ago. Oh, that Josh. We met in an Irish pub in Manhattan, Tuesday afternoon, the 11th of September, 2001. Yeah. Well, you were a 23-year-old film student, right? He says, yeah. Now I'm 37 years old. I've done 3 feature-length films, and I want to make your film.
Wow.
And that is how the film got made and got on its way. And so the last thing I was going to say with this whole thing, which is that it helped me to crystallize a thing which I was doing a little less formatically, if that's a word, formulaically. But for now, since 5 years, 5 days a week, I want to make sure that there's a green appointment in my calendar. I say 5 days a week because I don't try to be, do it necessarily on a Sunday. Sometimes I just want to hang with my wife.
Yeah.
But 5 days a week, I make sure that there are 5 green appointments. And what is the green appointment? The green appointment is someone I don't know. And the objective of that is to hear their story. And I have nothing else to gain from that initial encounter. It's just to explore somebody else's life. And most of the time what I want to hear is what they've been doing, who they are, what they're up to, what their foibles are, their issues, their achievements, whatever it is. And so I color them in. And by the way, today you are my green person.
Aw. I'm a greenie?
Yeah. Well, today. Tomorrow,
that.
you're going to be, post green.
That's such a beautiful exercise. I love that very much. And Minter, what is the film called that you made?
So it's called The Lost Ring Home.
Okay.
It's on YouTube, iTunes. It's also a book on Amazon, narrated and so on. And it's been a 25-year passion project. And I certainly encourage it, not just because it's my film, but it's a film that makes people talk. It's only a half an hour long, and I've done about 100 screenings of it with audiences from 8-year-old kids to octogenarians from the Second World War. I did one recently in LA at the VA with 40 veterans from the different wars that all have PTSD.
Wow.
And it has an objective to make people talk. And I brought with it my experience in women's studies to think of history through the eyes of women. So not just like a guy's thing where guys go off and fight wars and all that. There's an expression in the United States Navy that says that those who wait also serve, which refers to the families of those who are overseas.
Yeah.
And so typically in this case, it's my grandmother who waited desperately until she got the final telegram. And exploring what happens to those who don't necessarily go on the front line and all do the heroics. So and ultimately it's really a story at the most core level of father-son relationships and the impacts that and the consequences of those types of relationships on today's people.
Well, it sounds amazing. I am looking forward to watching it myself, and listeners, I'll make sure to include links to that film in the show notes for this episode.
Thanks.
Yeah, congratulations on that achievement. I mean, that seems like a beautiful, passionate life work.
It has been very fulfilling, and also I have to say that it's not just my family is involved. There are obviously many other people who've been a part of the story. And I have a network with them, many of them in California, but they're all around the world. And they all were part of the story because it's actually about this ring a physical ring from Annapolis that my grandfather held and was the last object that he touched before he was killed. And what happens to that ring. And it's just a magical and dramatic story, and it shows how unimportant value-wise objects are. It's the story around the objects that are important.
Wow, that sounds remarkable. Minter, before we start wrapping up, I did want to talk a little bit about your book, Heartificial Empathy. After all, that's one of the reasons you connected with me. And so tell the listeners just kind of a little bit about the book and then we'll kind of go from there.
So the intention of the book is focused on business people in general. And in order for business people to get the idea of encouraging empathy in the business, you need to understand what it is. So the first part of the book is to understand what is empathy, or my vision of empathy. And I really tend to focus more on the cognitive side of empathy, because in a business language, that's a more understandable element. The second part of the book is focused on the notion of encoding empathy into artificial intelligence, because that's sort of where the future is holding. And the work of trying to impose it or include it in artificial empathy, as Kate Darling, the ethicist, said, has an opportunity to shine back on who we are. Mm-hmm. The objective of the book is for business people to upgrade the amount of empathy that they have. It's not about the tyranny of empathy. It's about suggesting, well, that empathy can be really good for business, and by the way, society and everybody's relationships. And that from where you are, try to be more so. It's not about going from 0 to 100, but if I'm self-aware, I'm at level 6, maybe I can move up to 12, maybe 15, whatever. If I'm at 15, I can go to 25. The idea is to progress empathy. And by helping businesses be more empathic, we could help the world.
Right. Because we each of us in our day-to-day lives, every one of us connects with a business in one way or the other. Many of them.
Yeah, not just, so we're connecting with business, we're connecting with people.
Yeah.
All the time. You know, like you go into a store, the salesperson's harried or distracted, you're a customer. And actually being empathic with the salesperson could end up getting you a good deal. You go to you're going to travel. You go to the counter, this is my flight. And if you show empathy to the person who's dealing with your ticket, you might well end up with a better seat. Just because you showed empathy, because they had to shuttle in and sit there, and they got these angry passengers, and everybody's haughty or upset or rushed. And if you can just with them show empathy, it'll be beneficial to you. And that's sort of a personal benefit. I don't mean to be manipulative in that, but there's a benefit to being empathic, and people will reward you for it. So with your coworkers, being empathic and just taking that time when you can, because you can't always necessarily, as we mentioned before, necessarily drop everything and do that great empathy. But, inject it into your day on a more regular basis with your coworkers, and then with your customers. My goodness, but and I would even say it's not necessarily about the moment of interacting with them. It's just thinking about them. So if you're designing a product,
right,
they're in the shower. I mean, I used to, with my designers, we ended up making this bottle for shampoos for Redken. And one of the things which happens in a shower is you have wet hands. Hallelujah. And on top of that, when you have shampoos, they're not only wet, they're a little slippery because of all the silicone that's in the shampoos. Well, so what are you going to do to make the bottle a little bit easier to grip? And most of these bottles are round and slippery. So if you can just think through that experience in the shoes of the customer, in this case because you're not going to go to the shower, shoes, get barefoot, go into the shower, and think what it's like to shampoo your hair as if you were the customer. So that is the analogy that I have for saying it's got just so many different wonderful opportunities. And if you do that, I think that by being empathic to other people, there's this moment where listening to other people, it comes back to you as a wonderful sort of superpower. Yeah. And you just have a little lighter step. I did a speech at a sports club I'm a member of over here in London, and we said, "What's the role of empathy in competition?" There's no role in that. You want to kill your opponent, right?
Sure.
And I said, well, actually, you're limiting that thought to, first of all, just the tennis, singles, but maybe you have a doubles partner. Maybe you have ball people, umpires. Maybe you have people in the crowd. Actually, if you get meta on this, as you're walking towards the tournament you're going to go play in, maybe there are people you're walking through it, and think about that. And all of that is part of your karma, your ecosystem, the chaos element that we were talking about before. And if you start applying it there, there's a sort of a cosmic element to this, in my opinion. I mean, without being spiritual, it's about having that kind of resonance and beam. And if you can find the time for that, I feel it just gives you back energy. And it may not make you win that game, but you might win the bigger struggle.
Yeah, I'm absolutely. I am in agreement. I have a friend who she's her name's Erin McKean, and she founded Wordnik, which is an online dictionary and sort of word collective. And she's also a coder, and she did this speech at Google, I think. Maybe it was Google, something, one big tech company. Anyways, it was all about documentation as practical empathy. So even bringing it into like how coders and developers document like the language they use, document, how to, whatever. So they're thinking about the reader. They're thinking about like, okay, how, when I'm building out this code and developing and when I'm writing down my documentation, really thinking about like, who's going to read this and how may it help them in the best possible way through thinking about like, who are these types of people? What do they want? What are their needs? Why are they reading this in the first place? It's very fascinating. So just to point out, to your point, like, when it comes to design or customer experience, like empathy has so many applications.
So I did a recent empathy circle with a woman called Indy Young. And Indy is a professor and totally focused on this notion of empathy within coding. And we were talking exactly about this because a lot of code, there's one generation, second generation, and then there's iterations. And sometimes you have certain codes that are done 24/7 around the world where you have handoffs. And if you can integrate empathy into those handoffs, you will have less bugs. You'll have a better continuance and efficiencies throughout that. So the return on investment of being a more empathic is directly relatable to a better code. And by the way, probably less heartache, less, oh gosh, what a stupid person that was kind of comments.
Yeah. And it, there, I've worked in organizations where there's always this, not always, but I've worked in some pretty unhealthy corporate environments where there's, for instance, like a dumb sort of rift or negative relationship between maybe the creative team and the sales team, for instance. And we're quote unquote natural rivals, but the creative team delivering their marketing copy to the salesperson, it could be done in an empathetic way to better that relationship, to better maybe the whole sort of aura of creatives versus salespeople, and then in turn maybe benefiting the company at large.
Absolutely. Well, there's so many internal contradictions or contradictory forces, whether it's like finance and sales,
right? Sales
and marketing, creative and sales, creative and finance. And we do get into these sort of silly, egotistical, or this is my territory,
right.
And it's just balmy. You wonder who the enemy is.
Right. We're all in this for a common goal.
Yeah, but we get very quickly, knocked off course.
Yeah, we do. Well, let's start wrapping it up. We always kind of wrap up the show, but we'll plug your book and stuff at the end here. But I like to talk about empathy heroes toward the end. This is the part of the show where my guest and I, in this case, Minter and I, mention someone in our lives who's very empathetic. Could be even a character from a book, could be a character from a film, could be just a quote we like from one of our favorite authors. So I'm going to name my empathy hero first to give you, Mentor, some time to think on this. My empathy hero this week is my friend Rachel, who I had a text conversation with earlier this week where she was struggling with some things, and she was struggling in the, and I hope she doesn't mind me saying this, but like she has just such a huge feely heart, and she cares deeply for people in her life, and it's always what drew me to her as friends. Again, it's such an attractive quality. She cares so, and she's so loyal to the people in her life, and she loves them so deeply. And in my interaction with her via text, this was, made very clear, and I won't get into details, but, just she was dealing with some family stuff, and it all stemmed from her struggle stemmed from, almost caring too much, like caring how other people thought of her. And I think as big-hearted, sort of feely humans, sometimes we can get too much in that space, and we forget that we forget the self-awareness part of it, and we take our hearts a little too far. And I don't bring that up to shame my friend Rachel. I just think it's I'm just so proud of her and her heart, and I'm grateful to know her because she cares deeply about me and her friends and family, and I love her. So that's why she's my empathy hero this week. How about you, Mentor?
Well, first of all, Nolan, I appreciate being on the show with you, and
absolutely.
I enjoyed that conversation. I want to point people, and I'm sure you have talked about it before, but Lost Connections. It's not my hero, but it's my heroic book. And so by Johann Hari, I found that book to be particularly powerful for not only, let's say, debunking some of the myths around depression and the issues we have in society, but also looking at a solution, which I think really resonated with me, which is connect with people, connect with yourselves, connect with nature, connect with books, connect. As for a specific person, I'd like to call out my sister. So my sister and I have, so she's a doctor based in Baltimore, married to a surgeon, 3 children, and we had a wonderful time recently at my son's graduation. And over the last few months, we've been in constant cahoots with regard to our parents. But we also have children, and then we have spouses, and I find she's had a tremendous ability to listen to my foibles and my issues, and we've worked through some great challenges, and so despite the fact that she's a very busy doctor with 3 kids, young kids, she's found the time to hang out with me. We're usually by Skype or something like that. But so to Lisa.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's very beautiful. And I have not read that book, Lost Connection. So I'm adding it to my pile, my ever-growing pile.
Well, if I could just rise it up to the top. It's the 2 most important books that I read last year were Being Mortal by Atul Gawande, which is a very powerful look at what life is and how to deal with life, and specifically looking at end of life. And Lost Connections is a really interesting review of what is depression from a man who's a journalist, an English journalist, who has been depressed all his life. And so he goes into some sort of deep, dark spaces, and yet comes out of it with not a solution, because he's not necessarily solved his depression, but he really points to what are the avenues that we should be focusing on as a society to reconnect. That means hugging, means, that visceral relationship with earth, get your knees dirty in mud, put your hands in flour and knead some bread. Get under a blanket and read an amazing book in front of a fireplace. Of course, it's summer now, but if you're down under, you might appreciate that more. and then just reconnect with yourself, meditate, touch your body more, and doing it as I speak, and reconnect.
Oh, it sounds amazing. I will bring it to the top. Well, Minter, where can the listeners connect with you and order your book? And I'll make sure all this is linked in the show notes.
So my last book, actually all my books, of course, are on that little site, Amazon.com. Artificial Empathy, Future Proof, and The Lost Ring Home. And otherwise, I blog. I've been blogging I've done about 2,000 articles on my blog these days on minterdial.com. I've got a podcast that I do once a week for 10 years as well. It's called Minter Dialogue on all the regular podcast avenues. And otherwise, I tend to spend a bunch of time on Twitter, along with a few other people, at MDIAL.
Well, lovely. Well, thank you so much for being a guest on You, Me, Empathy. It was invigorating. You, me, empathy. That's right. Well, listeners, I'm here, you're here, we're here together on this wayward, overwhelming, awe-inspiring Pale Blue Dot. We have each other. It's You, Me, Empathy.